Good morning. Welcome back. Please feel free to move right on up to the front. You want to be as close as you can for the Oracle, Greg Jones, when he dives in just a minute. Please feel free to come on in, move as close up here as you can. There's plenty of seats right up front. So welcome back for day 2. We're glad to have you at the second half of our symposium event. If you weren't here yesterday, or maybe you were looking at your phone, I'll introduce myself again. My name's Tom Danowski, Oregon Wine Board and Oregon Wine Growers Association. We're glad to have you on behalf of both organizations. Just a couple quick things by way of reminder. You heard several announcements yesterday, and I know with everybody looking at their phone and sometimes visiting with colleagues, it's easy to miss some things. I want to just underscore a couple of them. You heard Greg Jones yesterday mention a effort being made to create some industry or generate some industry funding that will be matched by the Domaine Serene Winery for a project specific to studying the red blotch virus. For more information on that, Greg will be, of course, right up here after his presentation, but there's also more information at the Oregon Wine Research Institute booth out on the trade show floor if you're interested in being a part of that effort that is being so generously matched by Domaine Serene. Another point I should make is that in the afternoon session yesterday on human resources, there was some really important information presented by Jeff Peterson from Linfield College, who for the second year has answered the industry's call for a comprehensive salary survey of positions relevant both to vineyard operations and to wineries. Jeff presented those findings, but wanted to make sure you were aware that if you haven't seen them, or more importantly, if you wanted to enrich those findings with your own data, it is not too late to fill out the survey. And so many of our business owners ask, gosh, can we get a reliable industry survey on salaries that is specific to Oregon? Wine Business Monthly does a great job that is primarily skewed to our southern neighboring state. But for an Oregon-centric survey, Jeff Peterson is absolutely glad and happy to invite your data if you haven't provided it yet. The Wine Board will be providing another link to that survey if you didn't get a chance. It's really, really helpful, and it enriches the data set so much. Thank you, Jeff, wherever you are, for making that a priority, and thank you to those who did fill it out. But please remember, it's not too late. It's got salary ranges by position. It's even got them by gender. It's got them by geography within our state. It's a very comprehensive effort. Last point I should make is we owe some of our OWA members an apology because somehow we didn't quite have the most accurate list when all the badges were being put together, and some of you are missing your OWA ribbon. Please let us correct that. Your membership in the organization deserves to be acknowledged, and we want to do that. And I'm sorry that we missed some of you, but I have some ribbons right up here that you can still attach today. They are at the Oregon Wine Growers Association booth as well, if you miss me, because I'm kind of elusive. And you can still get them, of course, at the check-in counter where you picked up your badge. You deserve that recognition, and we want you to have it. And again, I'm sorry we kind of messed up there a little bit. I want to bring up our featured speaker of the morning. He has become the highlight of our symposium. He always gets the highest ratings from you because his content is so rich and so expertly delivered. He's trying to hide behind a beard this year, but you'll know him, and we just appreciate his insight so much. And it's so easy when you have a real treasure and a gift in your midst to sometimes overlook their true skills. Dr. Jones is an absolutely phenomenally globally esteemed climatologist and wine industry expert. Those vectors don't always intersect. And we're just so very lucky that he's here in Oregon and willing to be a part of our event and so many of your local events as well. So please join me in welcoming the chair of the Grace and Ken Evenstad Program for Wine Studies at Linfield, Dr. Greg Jones. Do you need this, Greg?
Good morning, and thank you, Tom. So he's already taken 5 minutes of my time, so I'm going to have to move quick. So after being Tom mentioning that my beard made me look like the Unabomber, I thought I'd give you just a little background. I started this as a no-shave November with my sons, and when it got to the end of the month, I was really concerned that we were going to have a mild and dry winter. So I decided that what I would do is I would grow a beard to change all that. And it did. So December 2nd is my Groundhog Day. If you see me with a beard on that day, you will know it'll be a cold and wet February. Okay? The problem is that if I shave it off, what happens to March and April? So anyway. So I'm going to give a talk like I've done in years past, trying to look at what we've seen globally to regionally in 2018, what Oregon looked like through that period, and then talk a little bit about where we are today, and then look at a forecast coming up for the spring and summer of 2019. So looking at this global and regional summary, fortunately the government is back in business, and so much of this data is fairly new coming out in the news. 2018 ended up, by all measures from different agencies around the world, to be the fourth warmest year on record, roughly 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit above average. The last 5 years collectively are the warmest years in the modern record that we have. 2018 was also the warmest year for the world's oceans. We have a shorter record there, but the oceans are now warmer than we've ever seen. And 2018 was also the Arctic's warmest year on record, and ice mass continues to be lost at record paces in both poles. If we look at the United States, this is a rank map for temperatures in each one of these states here. For the continental United States, we were roughly, again, similar to the global average, about 1.5 degrees above for 2018. However, you can see a pretty significant area there in the northern plains that were actually relatively cool, and they're still cool. They've been that way for about 2 or 3 years, and this has to do with some Arctic issues I'll talk about in a minute. It was the 14th warmest record in the continental United States in our 124-year record, and you can see Oregon. It was the what is that? The 8th warmest for Oregon. It was the 22nd year above average for the continental United States. And we actually, interestingly, in this past year, minimum temperatures were elevated much more than maximum temperatures, and that'll also be evident in some of the things I'll talk about Oregon as well. If we look at rainfall, rainfall was clearly a wet east and dry west. We had major tropical events in 2018 that really altered our precipitation numbers for the eastern United States. It was the third wettest year in the 124-year record, and that's kind of crazy because of how dry we were in the west. It tells you how much rainfall occurred in the east. The U.S. drought footprint has actually declined. It's the lowest it's been in about 20 years, and we'll look at that as well in just a minute. And the Four Corners and the Northwest have become areas of drought, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. We also know that 2018 produced quite a few billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, lots of different characteristics, everything from fires in the west to hurricanes and major hail events in different areas. We had 14 of these in 2018 and 16 in 2017. These are both more than we've seen historically in the United States, even when adjusted for today's dollars. So now let's kind of look into Oregon just a little bit, and I've showed these diagrams before. This first diagram is a regional temperature departures for normal for 4 stations within the major grape growing regions in Oregon. So Roseburg in green, Medford in purple, McMinnville in blue, and Milton-Freewater in the orange color. And these are deviations from the average by months, going from November, December 2017 across through October of 2018. And then on the far right are the averages or summation of those across to the dormant and growing season. And I just going back to kind of what we experienced last winter, very warm November, moderately cold December, extremely warm January, Fortunately, the February and March cooled down a little bit and helped us out, I think, last winter going into spring. But then after that, April was close to average, a little bit above, but close. And then we had May, June, July, and August were all much above normal, as much as 6.3 degrees above normal over in Milton Freewater. September ended up being relatively cool. We had some rain in about mid-month, and that helped cool things down. But then October ended up being pretty warm statewide. If you look at the numbers in the last winter, we were 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit above to just slightly below, and we're basically running pretty close to those same numbers this winter so far. The growing season last year in these 4 locations was 1.4 to 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. We can go and also look at precipitation, and this diagram gets a little bit more difficult to see because of the major amounts that we were below normal over in the seasonal averages here, but I think you can really see that the vast majority of each of these locations across most of the months were definitely below average in terms of rainfall. There are a few places and a few months that were above, but not many. If you accumulate this across the growing season, the dormant season was about 1% below to 43% below standard wintered rainfall in these areas. Some pretty dramatic numbers, and this is leading up to where we are in terms of our drought right now. The growing season was 14 to 58% below, and what we did get in the growing season was pretty much in early April and late October. These are growing degree day numbers for recent vintages in our long-term 1981 to 2010 climate normals. And if you look at this is McMinnville, Roseburg, Medford, and Milton Freewater again. You can see where 2018 was compared to the last few years. It still puts us in a top 5 overall in terms of the number. And we're just slightly above, again, for most places, our long-term averages. For the numbers, we were 9% lower to 1% higher than 2017, and we were still 5 to 17% above the longer-term average. So some observations just from what people have told me, shared with me about the vintage just overall. First of all, we had a slightly late bud break due to a slightly coolish April. Bloom and veraison caught up pretty quickly and was pretty close to average. I heard from people saying there was moderate variation in fruit set and crop load, with some places setting a lot of crop and others more average. Fire and smoke also was clearly an issue, and I can tell you from a meteorological standpoint that it really did affect regional maximum temperatures and minimum temperatures, but typically a little bit more at the maximum temperature level. And one of the pieces of evidence of this this year was interesting. The Umpqua Valley didn't quite have as much smoke as the Rogue Valley did, but yet the maximum temperatures in the Umpqua Valley were higher than the Rogue Valley for the first time in the 25 years that I've been looking at the data for those 2 locations. So clearly an issue of smoke kind of moderating the temperatures in those areas. We broke records for the consecutive days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. We also broke records in the consecutive days without rain in many locations as well. If you look at that, we could say, yes, we had lower heat stress, but greater drought stress. The interesting thing about breaking the record for number of days over 90 is that they were all 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. They were not 97, 98, 99, 100. So we didn't have the heat stress, but we still had a lot of overall warm days. And we definitely had greater drought stress in most places. Drawdown numbers were pretty early for the sensors that I've been able to see data for. We also, something to tie into this a little bit, and one of the reasons I really think that both California and parts of Oregon had lower maximum temperatures in 2018 was the fact that we had some very strong coastal upwelling. And this has a tendency to bring a lot of more colder water to the surface, which would tend to keep maximum temperatures a little bit lower than we would expect. And there's some evidence that that's ongoing again, and so we'll talk about that a little bit more. I heard from most people saying low bird pressure, but really high yellow jacket numbers. I think that this is an ongoing battle with not having winters that are cold enough to really keep the populations at bay, and it's probably the same for many other insects. So let's hope it gets and stays a little cold so we can keep these numbers down. Harvest was slow and steady, of course, because October gave us some glorious weather. That's probably what most people reported as just a wonderful harvest. I didn't hear any dramatic differences across most regions in terms of Brix and acid and pH. They're all about near average, meaning that growers really were able to kind of meet what they were looking for. Production numbers are pretty much honing in to will be somewhere between 5 to 15% over 2017 in terms of production. The numbers aren't in yet, but I think when we see them, we'll be somewhere in the middle of there. So let's go to current conditions, talk a little bit about kind of where we are and what that really means as we move off into the spring and summer. The first thing I need to do is talk about real or fake news. And the first one is the polar vortex. I want everybody to know that this has been with us forever. It's not something that just started, 2 weeks ago in the eastern United States. The polar vortex is an important part of our Arctic to mid-latitude climate. And the situation is that, of course, the eastern United States got hit pretty hard. Well, that polar vortex backed up and gave us what we're seeing right now with relatively cold conditions. It also plays a role in this thing called the ridiculously resilient ridge. The idea here is that when one place in the United States, the east, is cold, we tend to be warm because we're underneath a large ridge. 3 weeks ago, we were looking to set up to stay warm because of a ridge in the west, and the east should have stayed cold. But the polar vortex kind of flip-flopped on us a little bit and produced the conditions we have right now. The ridge is still out there. It's just further to our west than we would have expected. Atmospheric rivers are still out there as well. These things have been around forever, and we just only are hearing more because the media likes to talk about it. These are just rainfall events that come from areas in which we have ocean temperatures that are feeding more moisture to the atmosphere. And so that does bring up the last one, the blob. The blob is still with us too. This is just areas in the ocean that typically are much warmer than average, and they are essentially feeding some of these characteristics of atmospheric rivers. And the point I want to make about all of these is that these are all being driven by changes in climate that we're seeing throughout the mid-latitudes to the Arctic. And I think clearly there's some very big Arctic signatures going on. One of them that is kind of interesting, that you can look at the eastern United States during the last a really deep freeze that occurred. There were places in the Arctic that were 50 degrees above normal, large geographic areas, 50 degrees above normal, while the eastern United States was 50 degrees below normal. Some pretty dramatic kind of things that are going on. So where does that take us? Looking at some current sea surface temperatures. Our North Pacific is moderately warm throughout the area, spatially averaged. It's warmer than we've seen in a while. It's displaying these kind of positive Pacific decadal oscillation. Typically means we're going to have a certain characteristic of climate in the springtime from this, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. In the tropics, we're looking at kind of a moderate, weak El Nino event. Some people are even starting to call it an El Nino dud. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. If we look at an El Nino winter, this is typically what we would see. Pacific Northwest would be largely warm and dry, and California would be kind of normal rainfall and slightly cool to normal and slightly wet, depending on how strong the El Nino event is. Well, this is what we've been seeing. This is our water year, October 1st through just the other day. And this is the pattern that we're seeing. You can see that the vast majority of the West is running above average, maybe about a half a degree to almost 2 degrees. Some of the interior desert Southwest and Four Corners area has been fairly cool. This is the kind of pattern we would expect. It's a typical thing we would see from a weak or moderate El Nino. If you look at rainfall pattern, this is again the same data for the water year so far. You can see we're still moderately dry in parts of the Pacific Northwest, especially in western Oregon, while California is actually made up a little bit to here of late. So this is pretty close to what we would expect overall. If you go to snow water equivalents, I know this is a little bit harder to see. I'll zoom in on Oregon in just a minute. Snow water equivalents in our mountains right now are near average to moderately down across the West. However, we still have really 2.5 months of accumulation to go, so I'm hopeful that some of this will be made up. If you look at Oregon, this is our numbers, the coming out of February 9th report. I think this will change a little bit as we look into the next report, but overall, we know that the western watershed areas are typically slightly better off than last winter. All of this was pretty much in the red last winter, while the eastern part of the state is actually much higher than last winter. So we're in pretty good shape right now, and as I said, it'll probably get a little bit better. If you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, this is the most recent output, and again, I think this will change a little bit in the next release. Overall, nationwide, we've had the lowest drought footprint in nearly 20 years. Most of that is because the eastern United States has had such a wet 2018. The drought in the west continues. The Four Corners is the most severe, but this bullseye in Oregon has been developing over the past 6 to 8 months. California actually is the lowest they've been in many years. And so current conditions here, we'll look at an outlook in just a moment. So let's kind of put this all into kind of a summary of what I'm seeing and then what I think overall. We've had a lot of variability in weather and climate factors, both globally and regionally, in 2017 and 18, and there's still some concern for that variability moving forward. If we take the North Pacific and the tropical Pacific for what it is in terms of its heat load to our atmosphere, these two conditions, both being warm, are expected to put 2019 in the top 5 warmest years. There's no indication from anybody showing that we're going to see anything any different than having a year very similar to 2015 and 16. This is the UK Met Office. Thankfully, Brexit hasn't affected their data output, but this is, I've been watching this and working with some people over there for a long time, and they are very accurate. In the past 15 years or so, they've been right within their margin of error of their green forecast each year. And there you can see where they're projecting 2019 to be overall globally. The last piece of this is that I think that weather and climate extremes, and given kind of where we are in a warmer environment, will likely continue. Most of the forecasting agencies are pointing to the south, and largely tropical system extremes will be the most prevalent. The spatial extent of drought, as you saw some of the maps here, has declined, especially in the south and east, but we still need snowpack development in the west. We're getting it right now, but it needs to continue. Next, as I mentioned previously, the warming Arctic, I think, is a real issue. We're having, as I said, major flip-flops in our atmospheric dynamics because of the warming Arctic. When that pole to mid-latitude to tropic temperature gradient changes, our weather has to become more variable, and it's definitely a problem as we're moving forward, I think, to keep track of this and better understand it. I think if you look at the ocean, we put it all together right now in the Pacific, both of them should give us conditions in which we will likely see dry warm across the northern tier and coolish to wet across the southern tier. We'll see some possible changes to that here in just a little bit. If you look at what NOAA is saying, this is going out to March, April, May, and looking at their long-term forecasts. This has not deviated for 6 months. This forecast has been largely showing the western United States to be warmer than average, southeastern a little warmer than average, everything in the middle is kind of near normal. And so they're calling for us to still have a warmer spring, early summer. If you look at rainfall patterns, a little more variable across the country, but the bullseye to the Pacific Northwest being below average in rainfall, this again has not deviated for 6 to 8 months in the forecast, and I'm not so sure I see much evidence of it changing. So this prolonged drought characteristics is likely what we'll see. If you look at the U.S. Seasonal drought outlook, this is a drought tendency through April. Everything in brown there is a region in which the drought monitor is forecasting that drought conditions will persist. Everything in the kind of yellow color there are places where they think drought development is likely. So you think about everything that's going on out there right now, snow and rain, that we need much more of it to really come out of these kind of conditions overall. There is some indication that the Four Corners might get a little bit better in terms of their drought footprint. So this leads me to kind of where I think all of this is in terms of a forecast. Number one, I think all of the sea surface temperature characteristics in the Pacific, especially this week El Nino right now, it's basically adding more moisture to the atmosphere and warming it to some degree. However, it's fairly weak, and I think it's not going to be the big player that we've had in years past with El Ninos. It's going to transition to neutral pretty quickly in the late spring, early summer. The North Pacific looks to being maintained in terms of its overall warmth, and the only caveat there is that a lot of times when we end up having these very warm conditions out in the North Pacific, we end up having this strong coastal upwelling, which can make coastal zone wine regions be kind of near average and not have maximum temperatures quite so high. If you take this all together, this is really what it should say in terms of an overall framework. We're tilting the odds right now with the conditions that we're seeing to California being relatively warm and normal to slightly drier during the late winter and early spring, while the Pacific Northwest should end up being warmer and drier, even though right now in February we are actually fairly cold. Spring frost frequency, if you look at analogs from past years, frost frequency and severity tends to be lower in years with these type of conditions, but the probability does increase a little bit as you go northward and inland. Growing seasons, again, looking at analog years for conditions right now, we would say that these type of years have a tendency to be fairly warm overall in terms of overall heat accumulation. And persistence in the climate system, this is a big thing because things don't dramatically shift off of what we've been in the past 5 to 10 years or so. So it's tilting the odds to 2019 being very similar to 2015 and 16. I still think that drought concerns are out there. If we could, maybe I should keep the beard through March and April, and hopefully we could get some pretty good spring inputs, but we need some more snowpack development. In California, even though they've been fairly wet over the past 3 weeks or so, there's still a lot of concern. They really haven't made up enough moisture to be out of concern during the upcoming 2019 fire season. So with that, I thank you very much and looking forward to a good vintage in 2019. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Boy, that's always a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Thanks for most of you showing up on time for the second day of symposium. I know Greg's a big draw card, and we do definitely program it that way. My update this morning is going to be both an update, but also a little bit of educating you all about what the education manager at the Oregon Wine Board does. And then finally, how you can also participate in guiding the education programming for your industry. So the Oregon Wine Board education focuses on 2 main segments. So we have the industry education focus, which symposium is undoubtedly our biggest piece of. To date, this is our largest and most well-attended symposium with almost 2,000 attendees, including trade show floor and participants. So thank you all for supporting this event. The Education Committee and myself work incredibly hard on it effectively from April and May all the way through until really March, when we deliver back the videos and the survey results to you as well. So thank you for being here and for supporting us, and to all the trade show members for supporting us as well. The symposium today actually has, or in this past 2 days, has 9 Oregon Wine Board funded research projects, which we're very proud to share with you all. And this is our really one opportunity for you to discuss any of these research projects with the researchers and academics. We have California, Oregon, and Washington, and also the Finger Lakes represented in terms of lecturers. The research abstracts and reports from the Oregon Wine Research and Extension agents are also frequently shared on our industry education page. So if you sign up for the Grapevine newsletter, you will also be delivered those abstracts and reports in the Grapevine as well. So please sign up for the Grapevine if you're not already signed up for it. You're missing a lot of industry happenings. With nearly 800 wineries now in Oregon, the wine business education is also important, and we've developed a number of programs and research programs to help present at seminars, at symposium as well. One of the main ones, which Tom also mentioned earlier this morning, is the salary survey, which we work with Linfield College to conduct the survey. So it's an independent third-party survey. We don't see the results. Jeff Peterson cleans the results and analyzes them and presents them at the symposium each year. We really want to develop a series of years so that we can really have some really relevant data to see where our industry is sitting. We developed this salary survey in response to producer requests for having a more accurate salary survey based off of the Wine Business Monthly survey, which is really very California specific. So if you haven't filled out that survey, we really do need you to participate in order for us to better service the industry and for you to know better how to attract and retain your employees and the good employees in the business. We also presented a tractor safety workshop and a spray calibration workshop in 2018, both incredibly well attended. The spray workshop with Dr. Andrew Landers, who literally wrote the book on spray calibration, was attended by more than 100 attendees and 50% with Spanish translation. We are offering another spray calibration workshop in conjunction with Chemeketa College. So that's coming up, and it should have been in the Grapevine just recently, so please sign up for that. And again, we're offering Spanish translation with that also. Profit Planner, I'll touch on in a minute, and I just wanted to mention the WISE Academy workshops, which we have really developed in response to the 770 wineries in Oregon and more than 500 tasting rooms that really need to be over-delivering to develop wine club memberships and tasting room sales and hospitality staff. This has been a big ask for a lot of our industry, and in response to our growth, Danny Brager yesterday presented that we were in double-digit figure growth, and this is really fantastic news and a lot of opportunities for Oregon producers out there. But we need to keep in mind that this represents Oregon-branded product in national retail chains and represents growth from a relatively small base. The same slides that Danny was showing and talking about also showed that our market share remains relatively small, with the share of cases representing only 0.5% of trade sales, off-trade sales, sorry, and 6.2% of D2C shipments nationally. I see this as a positive in that there's a lot more that we can be doing if we train our people correctly, and WISE is a big part of that, and I know that it's been very well received. We've had 80 people sign up for the tasting room management workshop that was presented on Monday. There's 75 people at the D2C metrics workshop on Thursday, and another workshop in McMinnville, which is almost sold out as well for tasting room management. We heavily subsidize these workshops, and we're trying to work with WISE as much as we can to deliver you the sales training for your staff and the tasting room management that you need. profit planner, switching back to that, there will be a seminar on this morning coming up next, so if you would like to understand your bottom line and the importance of COGS, join Tara Brumberger and myself and Eric McLaughlin at 11:30, and we will show you how to do that and why it's important to your bottom line. So the Profit Planner is held on our industry education page. You can register for it online. It takes just a minute. You'll be sent a very easy registration access email and password. And then we have a number of filmed webinars or recorded webinars as tutorials that will guide you through the 6 workbooks that we have saved on there. It is very easy to use. It's basically plug and play, and this is for something that you can use with your entire team, giving each member ownership over their own division in your team, and really help to forecast your profits for the coming years. Finally, back to trade education. Education managers and the role of educators in the wine industry is growing. How many of you have distributors with educator roles or fine wine manager roles in their distributorship? Is there a number? We're seeing these roles grow. Winebow, for one, RNDC, Southern, all have educators and fine wine managers, and Kai and Christina mentioned yesterday that we are responding to this need by providing increased trade education programming. So in May last year, we presented, along with the Oregon Wine Trail, a masterclass in LA to almost 70 sommeliers, retailers, and key trade buyers, and all responded with very favorable responses that they would, 100% of attendees said that they were more likely to add Oregon wine to their business, and 96% of attendees reported themselves more likely to teach others about Oregon wine. So as mentioned yesterday, we are targeting these same audiences with our Wine Trail Masterclasses in 2019 and then again in 2020. In 2019, we'll be in New York and then Toronto, or flip that around. And then to support program adoption and sales for Oregon Wine Month last year, we held a webinar on mastering Oregon wine, which was signed up for by more than 200 trade attendees. Feedback from the trade has been so positive that we developed a Learn Oregon program, the 4-week program that Christina spoke about yesterday. You need to register by March 1st. It's the first time the OWB has offered an online education curriculum that's developed to train trade members to sell Oregon wine more confidently. The program begins the first week of March, on March 4th, and then runs for 4 weeks and touches on important topics like Oregon's AVAs, environmental sustainability, labeling regulations, and selling tactics. The curriculum will be delivered via email in bite-sized segments with opportunities to participants to win weekly prizes. So please push this out through your distributors, and also encourage your sales staff to sign up for it as well. To date, we have more than 500 trade registered for this program, which really is exciting and shows how much growth potential and interest there is in Oregon wine at the moment. If you would like to get involved in any of these masterclasses as well, please reach out to Christina or Kai or myself, and we will sign you up and send you information. Finally, page 42 in your programs. Can everyone have a look at that page? I'd like to thank all of the education committee members. If they'd like to stand, if there's anyone in the room, I would like to give a quick round of applause. I feel like this is a fantastic seminar this year. So Andrew Bandy-Smith, Lee Bartholomew, David Beck, Jean Beck, Ellen Britton, Ashley Campion, Mark Chen, Chris Kalina, Scott Dwyer, Brian Gruber, Vanessa Haddock, Jeff Hall, Gina Hennon, Claire Giroux, Greg Jones, Carrie Kelsher, Eugenia Keegan, our chair, our fearless chairwoman, Anthony King, Meg Murray, James Osborne, Jeff Peterson, Dan Rinke, Nicole Schultz, Natalie Sigafus, Patty Skinkus, Emily Terrell, Vince Vidrine, Carl Weichold, and Hallie White. Thank you all. This all would not be possible and come together without all of your input. Thank you so much. And just 2 more things and then I'm done. I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm doing pretty good. Please save the date, July 8th, Willamette Valley Vineyards. We are developing a Women of the Vine seminar, symposium, conference. And please put that on your calendars. It's going to be a fantastic full-day conference out in the Willamette Valley on July 8th. So mark your calendars and stay tuned for information coming through the grapevine for that. And then finally, you're going to leave us this morning and head out to the trade show floor for the wine trials. We have, and this is on page 16 in your program guides if you'd like to have a look at it. We have 6 bars representing 3 different trials, a viticulture and 2 enology trials. And so bars 1 and 4 will have the same trial tasting at them. Bars 2 and 5 will have the same, and bars 3 and 6 will have the same. And again, I would like to thank Scott Dwyer for heading this, and also thank Erath, Edgefield Winery, and Adelsheim Vineyards for supporting this program and for being here today to pour. So please take advantage of them and go and taste with them and chat with the winemakers. Thank you all and enjoy the day.
Thank you, Bree, and thank you, Greg, as well. One thing we do to almost all of our speakers, and I'm sorry that we do, both here from the main stage and in all the breakouts, is we ask them to just cram so much juicy material into such a tight time frame, and they almost always do a sensational job, and we just saw that again right now. But boy, they just deserve a lot of credit for that because they're just under some wicked constraints, and you might wonder why didn't they touch on such and such, and it's almost always time. One of the things I enjoy listening to Greg is I always get some inside insights into new technical jargon that I can use with friends and family when I want to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And Greg, you've added to my vocabulary again with the blob. Thank you for that. That's the kind of penetrating insight only at the symposium. You can add to your vocabulary there. We're throwing an awful lot of stuff at you, specifically with respect to Oregon Wine Board activities. I'm sure that it goes without saying, but many of the things that Bree and Kai and Christina and Jess Willie and Marie have been talking about over the last couple days, many of them are free. Every webinar we do is free. You're getting one on Oregon Wine Month. We're going to offer one, as Bree just said, a 4-part series on Learn Oregon. They go on and on. If we haven't said that enough, they're free. You've paid for them with your tax dollars. And please invite your trade members to be part of that 4-part series, but you've got to register by March 1, as Bree said. We're going to be reminding you about all this stuff, which reminds me again, if you're not getting our Oregon Wine Board grapevine, grab somebody. We want you to get it because you got to have all this information because we're using your tax dollars to pay for it because you've asked for it and you deserve it. We're going to cut you loose now. We've got about an hour and a half now for a break on the trade show floor. Bree did mention the experimental wine tasting. The poster session in E141. E141 continues. There's also an OLCC seminar on do's and don'ts of advertising and also on tasting room, advertising your events and tasting room practices. You don't want to miss that. It's in the mini theater straight back against the back wall. And I think that's just about all we have. We'll see you back here after your morning seminars, and we've got a great afternoon program starting with the lunch when we'll be giving out our industry awards. So thanks for your attention. Thank you to Bree and Greg for being such a good part of our program. We'll see you back shortly.